EmMajority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
EmMajority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, June 20th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Joanna Wuest, professor at Mount Holyoke College, on the history of unions protecting LGBTQ rights. And later in the show, David Broder will be with us to talk about the far right's wins in Europe's elections. Also on the program today, U.S. officials express pessimism again about a ceasefire. This comes as Israel kills at least 17 people in airstrikes in central Gaza refugee camps and prepares to widen its war with Lebanon. The UN Human Rights Office accuses Israel of war crimes, including the crime of extermination. What does that sound like, folks? In a 7-2 ruling, the Supreme Court upholds a Trump tax on offshore earnings that paid for tax cuts for the rich. But the big deal here is that it also rejects a preemptive ban on a wealth tax. So that's actually good news from the Supreme Court. House Republicans work to create a bill around King Trump's idea to eliminate a tax on tips. No wage increases proposed by the Republican Party. Democrats introduced an effort to repeal the Comstock Act, an 1800s federal law being used to restrict abortion pills. RFK fails to qualify for the first debate next week. It's authoritarian. Extreme heat rages around the world. More than 1,000 have died on the annual pilgrimage to Saudi Arabia. 2 killed in wildfires across New Mexico, and in Texas, catastrophic flooding is expected after Tropical Storm Alberto makes landfall in Mexico. New analysis shows workers are voting to join unions at the highest rate in 15 years. And lastly, Louisiana orders its public schools to display the 10 Commandments. I mean, this has got to be appealed, right? All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It is an EmMajority Report Thursday. We are here with Matt Leck. We are here with Bradley Alsop.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
I'm not Bradley, I'm Matt.
Yes.
I just didn't get in there in time because Emma, jumped all over me.
I mean,
welcoming myself back to the show.
Yeah. Wow, you were gone a day. Really, you need a parade
Feels
or
like a
something
long
like
time.
that? Jesus.
That's how rarely I take days off. Feels like I've been gone forever.
Yeah, I mean, well, I take the odd Wednesday off. I don't need to be this exposed on the internet because I do it to myself, but I could take every other Wednesday off and just be a normal person. It's probably better for our mental health, I think, right? As opposed,
I probably should just double the amount of time that we're streaming.
Stream every day. I don't know how someone like Hassan does it, by the way.
No, I don't know when.
Probably the amazing amounts of money that he makes.
Well, the interesting thing about Hassan is like most of the people who do that, I don't know when they ever read it, and it's clear that they never do, apart when it's on stream. But
Right.
Hassan actually seems like he's making time to actually learn things off stream, which is fascinating to me.
That's rare for streamers. So he's killing it over there. Anyway, let's talk about this because this broke yesterday. A new independent report was published by the United Nations Human Rights Council yesterday, Wednesday, and they basically concluded that Israel and Israeli forces have been carrying out war crimes in Gaza. They also spoke about Hamas's crimes and other Palestinian militia groups, and they accused those groups of the crimes of murder, attacking civilians, inhuman treatment.
Attacking civilian objects too, which is, you could read into that, destroying all the hospitals and universities and bakeries and that sort of thing.
Well, this is the Hamas, what they accused Hamas of, right? And you see that, like, you could make an argument that Hamas is a group that is being currently occupied, and this doesn't deserve to be said in the same breath, just from a international law standpoint, as what Israel has done in its ongoing genocide. But they're trying to make these accusations stick. And so they have to talk about the Hamas atrocities because they were atrocities.
And you can commit war crimes even if you're occupied, is my understanding. But ultimately, the overall context needs to be foregrounded.
Right. The context needs to be foregrounded, but Hamas did commit those crimes and kill children on October 7th. Now, Israel has killed thousands of children, I should say. I think it's around 16,000 by the latest count, but basically they've stopped counting.
Yeah.
So this report did talk about that, but the majority of it was focused on Israel's crimes just based on the volume. And the fact that they said extermination is key, I think, for the ICJ genocide case, because they're a UN body as well. But here is Navi Pillay, the UN chair on the commission on the inquiry into occupied Palestine and Israel, speaking and announcing their findings yesterday.
In relation to Israel's military operations and attacks in Gaza from 7th October, we conclude that Israeli authorities are responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, including extermination, intentionally directing attacks against civilians and civilian objects, murder or willful killing, using starvation as a method of war, forcible transfer, gender persecution targeting Palestinian men and boys, sexual and gender-based violence amounting to torture, and cruel or inhuman treatment. Israel's total siege of the Gaza Strip has weaponized the provision of life-sustaining necessities for strategic and political gains, including through cutting off supplies of water, food, electricity, fuel, and other essential supplies, including humanitarian assistance. It constitutes collective punishment, disproportionately impacting pregnant women and persons with disabilities, and is causing grave harm to children, including starvation-related deaths. We found that the immense numbers of civilian casualties in Gaza and widespread destruction of civilian objects and infrastructure were the inevitable result of an intentional strategy to cause maximum damage, disregarding the legal obligations of distinction, proportionality, and adequate precautions. Israel also forcibly transferred almost the entire population into small enclosures that are unsafe and uninhabitable. The deliberate use of heavy weapons with large destructive capacity in densely populated areas constitutes an intentional and direct attack on the civilian population. Although Israeli officials have repeatedly stated that their operations in Gaza are intended to destroy Hamas and to release hostages, yet neither of these aims has been largely achieved at the expense of thousands of lives. We found that Israeli forces committed sexual and gender-based violence with the intent to humiliate and further subordinate the Palestinian community. Palestinian women were targeted and subjected to sexual violence and harassment online and in person. Men and boys experienced specific persecutory acts, including sexual and gender-based violence amounting to torture and inhuman and cruel treatment. The Commission concluded that specific forms of sexual and gender-based violence constitute part of Israeli security forces' operating procedures.
Can you pause it for a sec? Okay, so that is a really key statement to make, that sexual and gender-based violence is a part of Israeli operating procedures. Now, there was a lot of controversy about a piece in the New York Times that was widely disseminated and even won awards, called Screams Without Words, which detailed sexual violence on October 7th, which I have no doubt that some sexual violence occurred, but the allegation was that it was systemic and a part of Hamas's battle strategy. And why I think a lot of people who have been following this were skeptical of that reporting at the beginning was because, well, there weren't a ton of firsthand accounts, and also because of the history of Black and brown people being accused of the crime of rape or sexual violence in order to further colonial ambitions.
I mean, it's a settler staple, frankly.
Yes.
Like I'm not using that. I'm using that just a historical term. Like in our history too, we accuse Native Americans and like slaves of escaped slaves, like of that sort of crime. Way more than it actually happened because of, a sort of warrant it gives for violent suppression.
Yes, and let's play this. It's an older clip because it just occurred to me, but I saw this morning. It's a great explanation of what Matt is just saying there, because that UN report basically says there that this was systemic by Israel, the use of sexual violence against Palestinians. Are we getting a front page splash about that accusation? No, but
because we don't want that warrant.
Exactly. And this is Professor Rudolph Ware, about a month ago, a professor of history here. And this explains a lot of the racial politics and the colonial politics behind accusations of sexual violence.
Rape allegations preceded almost every single mass lynching in the history of the U.S. South. That the way that white womanhood has been weaponized in order to justify sociopathic brutality against people of color, that is so legible to me that it didn't need interpreting. There's no hieroglyphs, there's no symbols that need to be read. It's like literally just written in capital letters that this is a rationale for a lynching, and it serves no other purpose. So I was not surprised. And I said in other places and in other times that white women's tears are more precious than brown and Black people's blood. It hurts this society more to see a white woman's tears hit the ground than to see our blood hit the ground. And so, and the tears, the crocodile tears, so often, the fake tears, the phony tears, claiming to feel afraid, right? Whether it's behind allegations of sexual violence or just saying, I'm afraid. So therefore, repress, brutalize, hurt these people, lock them up, protect my feelings. I want to feel safe. I understand how white safety, and especially white feminine safety, has been manipulated and weaponized in order to take the lives of people of color. You think about people like Emmett Till, lynched for supposedly looking funny at a white woman. Like, you understand, what's going on. And it's the reason why all of these Zionists, it's the first thing that they go to, right? You see these videos of confrontations on campus, and it's like, I hope well, they've been doing that. The thing is it's always projection, right? Is that a lot of African Americans are my skin color because of the number of slave owners, right, that sexually violated the enslaved. And they're always accusing you of doing the thing that they have been doing to you. It's always projection and it's always confession.
So I just thought that was a really good explanation as to why, the Nina Turner and Rashida Tlaib took out a great piece and wrote a piece in The Nation talking about how the Black liberation struggle is interconnected with that of the Palestinian struggle, because, you know, we can talk about like the shades of whiteness, right? And you're white, you're not white, or is this Israeli white, is this Israeli not white? And that's just kind of a silly way to look at how whiteness is constructed in our society. Whiteness is constructed in orientation to power, and we know which party has all the power here, which party is backed by the United States, world empire, and all of that. So sexual violence is horrific in any way that it happens to Palestinians, to Israelis. But when you see how it's weaponized, you can understand the racial politics beneath it and why those struggles are interconnected. And it's a struggle between colonizers as state powers and colonized people. And I wish that we would get based on those accusations laid out by the United Nations there, by this commission. I wish that we would get that same coverage for the sexual violence that's been inflicted upon Palestinians.
Again, it's because we're not looking for that warrant. And even before October 7th, there was lots of Palestinians that were being caged in Israel. And we don't really look at them as hostages, for instance, because, again, we're looking for a warrant for, brutal suppression there. And like the original literature of America is the captivity narrative. The idea that either enslaved people or Native Americans want, to rape women and not their freedom is sort of a foundation to where we can warrant violence to basically exterminate people.
Exterminate. So I'm hoping that the ICJ is paying attention to another part of the United Nations, saying right there they are guilty, or that they're accusing them of the crime of extermination. I describe this as like we're putting rocks in a backpack of somebody who's crawling up a hill trying to commit this genocide. And that's what these, whether it's Oxfam, whether it's Amnesty International, whether it's official organizations like the United Nations making these accusations clear through investigations. Just keep putting rocks in this backpack, making it harder for Israel and the United States to climb up this hill, and create pressure, create weight, day by day, pointing these things out. I know that people are sick of the fact that these organizations don't have any enforcement, and I am too, but they are pressure points, and it's important to highlight them, in my opinion. All right, folks, we are going to be speaking to Joanna Wuest shortly, but first, a word from one of our favorite sponsors, Liquid IV. It is so hot outside, and I know it's extremely hot in the rest of the country. I'm thinking of people in the southwest of this country right now and in Texas who are experiencing acute heat and the effects of climate change. Not to be a downer about it, but you've got to stay hydrated. And summer is just getting hotter and hotter, and you have to prioritize your hydration. We're made of 60 to 70% water, so when we are dehydrated, we feel imbalanced. You know the signs: fogginess, fatigue, etc. With all the drinks out there, you want hydration that works. Liquid IV delivers extraordinarily incredible hydration with advanced science, thanks to Live Hydroscience and optimized ratio of electrolytes, vitamins, and nutrients. One stick of Liquid IV delivers superior hydration to water alone, with 3 times the electrolytes of leading sports drinks, plus 8 vitamins and nutrients. It's hydration for endurance, mental clarity, and overall well-being. I drink Liquid IV all the time, especially on a hot day. I like the strawberry. I like the watermelon flavor. The acai is a personal favorite of mine. And it's kind of good when you're a little dehydrated for maybe another reason. Say you went out the night before. But particularly in the summer, I just have to basically have Liquid IV, at least 1 packet every day. And it's much better than some of the gunk that you get where, why is it this fluorescent color? Don't look into it. Liquid IV doesn't have the stuff that you have to worry about there. It is the #1 powered hydration brand in America. It has 3 times the electrolytes of leading sports drinks. You just tear, pour, live more. 1 stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. 8 vitamins and nutrients, non-GMO, and free from gluten, dairy, and soy, no artificial colors or sweeteners. It comes in 4 delicious sugar-free flavors: white peach, green grape, raspberry melon, and lemon lime. A zero sugar hydration solution with no artificial sweeteners, clinically tested to hydrate more than water alone. Turn your ordinary water into extraordinary hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code MajorityRep, one word, at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. MajorityRep at liquidiv.com for 20% off your first order. All right, folks, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Joanna Wuest. We are back, and we are joined now by Joanna Wuest. Apologies for mispronouncing it a little bit earlier. Assistant Professor of Politics at Mount Holyoke College, incoming Assistant Professor of Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Stony Brook University, author of Born This Way, Science, Citizenship, and Inequality in the American LGBTQ Movement. And Joanna has a piece in the spring 2024 issue of New Labor Forum entitled The Best Way to Secure LGBTQ Rights, Unions. Joanna, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So happy Pride. And we were just headlining this earlier in the show, how unionization and the rates of workers voting to join unions is the highest that it's been in at least 15 years, according to Axios. But also, I would say, just the level of enthusiasm surrounding unionization is extremely high. But can you talk a little bit about when your scholarship in studying the history of unions as they relate to LGBTQ people and what this moment is like within that broader history?
Certainly. So yeah, we see tons of exciting work being done by a new generation of labor militants. Particularly Starbucks Workers United features a lot of kind of queer advocacy blended into their union building at those cafes. But if we look back several decades ago, we see a history that I think a lot of folks don't know about how central labor unions in this country have been to LGBTQ rights. So as early as the 1980s, we're really seeing some important contract wins being won by newly organized queer caucuses within unions. An early example would be workers unionized in working for the Village Voice, won domestic partners benefits, which was really crucial during the beginnings of the HIV/AIDS crisis. And we've just seen in the last few decades those contract wins build up, so much so that you might be a unionized worker who has sorts of protections against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity as part of your union contract in a way that maybe your city or state laws don't actually protect you from such discrimination.
And your piece highlights this well because teachers are often at the front lines of many anti-LGBTQ laws throughout the country. And it's not just DeSantis in Florida with Don't Say Gay recently. You write about an example from California as well in the late 70s and early 80s, where there were conservative-led efforts by politicians to crack down on LGBTQ teachers in schools. The groomer trope goes back many, many decades, if not centuries. Can you talk a little bit about that example from California?
Yeah, so right, Don't Say Gay is in a long line of decades and decades of this kind of scapegoating of queer teachers. And so we see in 1978, as the religious right is starting to organize in this country, this state senator named John Briggs in California, who is notably part of the Reagan coalition in California at the time. He's an ardently anti-labor state senator, and he decides that he wants to put a ballot initiative up to the voters in an attempt to strip gay and lesbian school teachers of their ability to teach in public schools. And thankfully, this set off a massive reaction, just not among gay and lesbian civil rights organizations themselves, but there was a huge workers' coalition of different unions involving postal workers, the United Auto Workers, teachers' unions especially, but even culinary workers all got together and decided that they needed to defeat what they saw as fundamentally an attack on a minority group that was en route to a broader destruction of public goods, like public education, like the ability of workers who work for the government to gain protections and to make a living wage in that line of work.
And it's important, particularly, I think, for groups on the front lines like LGBTQ people, like people of color, to have these protections, because we see in just statistics how levels of poverty for LGBTQ people in particular are higher compared to cis straight people, which on its face, LGBTQ people come in all different colors and different ethnicities, right? Like, the systemic issues that LGBTQ people face are different than that of non-white people in this country. But at the same time, you can just see it in the numbers. They are still on the front lines of discrimination. And without a union, it's just kind of like every man, woman, or person for themselves.
Yeah, this is really important, especially because not only do unions protect all sorts of, give all sorts of protections against discrimination that, like I mentioned, some cities and states don't afford sexual and gender minorities, but unions also contribute to living wages, housing security, healthcare access, and all of those things are actually at the root of a lot of health and economic disparities in the LGBTQ population writ large. So again, unions protect against discrimination on the job, but they also provide the kind of benefits to queer workers that they provide to all workers that can actually kind of ameliorate those sort of ugly disparities in the LGBTQ population.
The Supreme Court and conservative activists really want to give places of work and businesses the ability to discriminate against LGBTQ people based on dubious claims of religious freedom. Can you speak about that fight in recent years and how unions have played a role in standing up to those efforts by conservative lawmakers and lawyers and activist groups?
Yeah, so part of the way that unions do this is just by providing protections that civil rights law cannot. And by that, I mean that your Civil Rights Act at the federal level, for instance, has this thing called Title VII that protects you on the job against discrimination. And those protections granted on the basis of race and sex have been really paltry. And that is, if you're a worker who's discriminated, you bring a Title VII claim to the federal courts, and it's extremely difficult to win your case. Much more difficult than it would be to win a case on the level of your union kind of fighting against a violation of the contract if you have anti-discrimination principles kind of baked in there. And this is becoming even more important as we see the Supreme Court doing this really disingenuous competing rights kind of framework. And that is, they pit the newly won civil rights of sexual and gender minorities. The Supreme Court granted some Title VII protections to those groups in 2020 in a case called Bostock. But who knows how much that's actually going to matter in the near future, because the Supreme Court keeps giving, as you note, employers a religious and a free speech constitutional right to discriminate against their LGBTQ workers. And if we had to guess about who's going to win out in that duel of civil rights, I think it's pretty clear with this Supreme Court as it's constituted who that's going to be.
And as always with these fights, it's people who are either lower income or middle income even, who are the ones who bear the brunt of that. What are some of the recent fights that you're seeing on this front in terms of targeting LGBTQ workers?
Yeah, so for one, we see, I think most famously, the sorts of rollbacks of rights and attack on queer people in the state of Florida, as kind of spearheaded by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And so we know kind of laws like Don't Say Gay have restricted the ability of teachers to even talk about pronouns, about LGBTQ history in the classroom. And those laws are passed on this kind of presumption that school teachers are potentially groomers, right? And that they're a danger fundamentally to children. And what's so insidious about that is that at the same time the DeSantis coalition passes something like Don't Say Gay, they also passed a thing called the Paycheck Protection Act in Florida, which targeted those very teachers that they just scapegoated as dangerous pedophilic groomers by attacking the kind of fundamental basis of their unions. And so we can see it's a classic scapegoating move. Do I think DeSantis likes queer and trans people? No. But do I think that that's his main aim in government is to attack queer people? I don't think that's the case. I think
it's a pretext to attack public education, basically.
Exactly. It's exactly what it is.
Right. And it's just, I don't really care what happens to them along the way, and I'll throw some red meat to our base that's obsessed with social control. But in the end, it's about attacking education and teachers more broadly.
Exactly. And we can see why that's the case, because in the last several years before 2021, Republican governors were really terrified to pass anti-trans laws. And that's because back in 2016 in North Carolina, this governor lost billions of dollars in tourist and economic development in the state because he signed a draconian anti-trans bathroom law. And so these state governors will pick up this scapegoating legislation when it works for them. In the rare moments that business opposes that sort of thing, they'll drop it. And so we can see they don't drop the attacks on unions, though. So that's the kind of steady through line in their coalition.
You mentioned businesses there, and you see just so much pinkwashing. I'm not sure if that's is that the best term for that? I've been mostly talking about it in regards to Israel lately, but like basically using the veneer of LGBTQ tolerance and acceptance in order to sell things. But then when it comes to, say, protecting someone like Dylan Mulvaney, who was viciously attacked by the right in a coordinated campaign against Bud Light, they kind of capitulated. And I know that that's not about unions, really, but it does just go to show that corporations are not going to protect people proactively. It's really whenever it's in the interests of their shareholders and how much money they can make.
Totally, yes. The labor unions we've been talking about make kind of steady gains for LGBTQ civil rights, whereas these business coalitions and corporations really selectively put up pride decorations and even engage in some really limited boycotts in these very kind of rare moments. And they do so not even just to sell to a queer clientele, but like in that North Carolina example I was discussing, many of the companies that pulled out economic expansion in reaction to that bathroom ban actually did so because they could get a lower tax rate, more kind of tax holidays and all sorts of benefits to locate to another Republican Party controlled state next door. And that might explain why when North Carolina goes it alone with a bathroom ban in 2016, we see all of this economic boycott and pulling out of business expansions. But when all these Republican-controlled states do it at once, these corporations don't have states to go to any longer as a credible threat where they want to relocate, where there are kind of lower protections for workers and fewer taxes for them to pay in general.
You also wrote about the Starbucks unionization push and the role that LGBTQ people have played there. We've had Starbucks workers on this program to talk about their efforts, and we know that the Starbucks unionization effort was one of the big moments, I think, for labor in this country in quite a while. How do LGBTQ protections play into the Starbucks example in particular, and what were some of the roles that queer people, gay people, trans people, etc., played in that fight with Starbucks?
Yeah,
or playing currently. Sorry.
Right. It is, yes, ongoing. And so, yeah, a little while ago, I believe last summer, the director at Pride at Work, which is the kind of queer advocacy arm of the AFL-CIO, said that Starbucks Workers United was the queerest union that he'd seen in ages and kind of maybe ever. And I think that has something to do with the demographic. It has something to do with the kind of issues that are on the table for those workers. I believe also last summer, Starbucks Workers United protested the company's decision to pull some of Pride decorations that they had historically put up during the month of June. Unsurprising in light of the fact that there are many kind of states, as we've talked about, that have gone hard against trans civil rights, and that's become so much of an issue that it might affect their consumer base. And of course, they're not going to put their neck out if that is the case. And so I think those are just kind of some of the examples of what Starbucks Workers United have done to kind of further queer rights in this country and for the workers on the job.
Well, Joanna Wuest, you can read this piece in Jacobin as well as New Labor Forum entitled The Best Way to Secure LGBTQ Rights Unions. You can also read her book, Born This Way, Science, Citizenship, and Inequality in the American LGBTQ Movement. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we'll be joined by David Broder. We are back, and we are joined now by David Broder, Jacobin's Europe editor, historian of French and Italian communism, author of Mussolini's Grandchildren, Fascism in Contemporary Italy. David, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So, can you explain what the results were in the latest European Union Parliament elections, and can you also just explain what the European Union Parliament does and how that affects the domestic politics of countries like Germany, France, etc.?
Yeah, it's quite a funny election because really it's 27 national elections all going on at once. The European Parliament itself isn't very powerful. It's not really like the legislature or the basis of a government for the European Union, although it can elect some of the top officials for the EU. Probably most voters would see the election as a way to say what they think about their national governments. Overall, the balance in the European Parliament shifted somewhat further to the right. So the biggest group is still the European People's Party. So that's parties like the German Christian Democrats. But there was also a moderate increase in the support for far-right parties, anti-immigration parties. Maybe a bit less than expected, but they still have about a quarter of seats. So they're pretty influential. People might think the European Union is a nice and liberal and international institution, but quite a lot of the political influence in it is from anti-immigration and far-right parties. As I said, not actually that many seats changed hands in this election. The far-right breakthrough probably wasn't overall as much as might have been expected. But then there's a big caveat on that, which is that the far-right success was concentrated in the two biggest and politically most important countries in the EU, so France and Germany. In Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland had several scandals during the campaign based on its leaders saying things like the SS weren't all bad, or saying that even Germans with immigrant parents should be deported. But they still beat the Social Democrats, the main party of government. And then in France, the far-right party led by Marine Le Pen, Rassemblement National, scored more than double the vote for President Emmanuel Macron's party, and then he was prompted to call another national election. So really those two votes are the kind of way in which this election seems like a far-right breakthrough. And the French election now in just a couple of weeks' time could see Le Pen's party actually enter government for the first time.
Well, so my understanding is that Macron's calculus was, let's call these snap elections. I already don't really have control of parliament, so this would give my party 2 more years when my term is up to come up with an opposition to the far right, and we'll be able to combat them. But it does seem like there is this, sizable rebuke of the politics of Emmanuel Macron and his centrism that perhaps they shouldn't mess with because Marine Le Pen is a total psycho. What was that calculation, and how do you think what's your assessment, I guess, of the rationale behind it?
Well, I think that Emmanuel Macron, probably at an individual level, has a very great belief in his capacities to reorient the political field, to shape events, to take the initiative. I think he called the election thinking, he's beaten Le Pen in 2 presidential elections. He wants another direct contest with her, and he can defeat her again. But I think that even without that scenario playing out, and in fact, the polls suggest that Le Pen's party will easily beat his. The idea that he can force a head-to-head is overstated. And in fact, the left-wing bloc called New Popular Front, that's the real alternative to the far right, judging by polls. So I think Macron's party has no chance of actually winning the election or even keeping as many seats as it has. But I think part of his calculation actually is that it isn't so bad if Le Pen wins. He wouldn't have called the election if he was frightened by that prospect, because the opinion polls tell us that that is a pretty likely outcome, that Le Pen's party will either have a majority or something close to it. And we've seen a lot of establishment media, pundits in organs like the Financial Times, saying, well, maybe if Le Pen's party is in power for a couple of years under Macron as president, he'll be able to clip its wings. They'll be exhausted in power because they won't be able to play the game of being sort of populist outsiders, and that being tested in government will kind of expose them as shallow and fake. And I think this is an extremely dangerous gamble, and one that's played on the backs of migrants, of course, of welfare recipients. Them being in power, I think, isn't something we should look on lightly. But yeah, I think parts of the French political and indeed business establishment are starting to say, okay, Le Pen's party looks like it will win eventually, maybe win in 2027. So let's prepare a soft landing. Let's reach some sort of accommodation. So even though Macron doesn't want Le Pen to win the election, I think part of the calculation is it wouldn't be so bad if she won and could have other positive effects from the standpoint of her party being in power without really threatening French capital.
But why would empowering Le Pen's far-right party to get more seats make it more likely that centrists or liberals can take back those seats in 2 years' time? Because usually sometimes when people get empowered, they build off of that, and what they would be able to say is, well, Macron is the one standing in the way of our agenda, so you need to vote for us more this time around because he's in the way of, ensuring that all these migrants drown in the sea, which is what we want.
Well, I think that is what will happen. Yeah, I agree with
Yikes.
you. But I think, like, from the standpoint of probably Macron or people around him, they think that what Le Pen's party, the part of their analysis which is correct is Le Pen's party has built an opposition, has built its strength, kind of by being all things to all people. Right, it's never been in government before. So on the one hand, it can say, we're a party of low taxes, reducing the debt, cutting wasteful public spending, and also be a party that says, hey, Macron's taken away your pension, Macron's undermining welfare. So, there's some sort of establishment discourse that being in power will force Le Pen's party to make choices, to pick sides. But I think it's that kind of political calculus, kind of 4D chess is very overstated. I think you're right that actually in power, they'll be able to set the political agenda. And in many ways, they are already setting the political agenda, even as a strong opposition, particularly on issues like immigration. Lest we forget, Emmanuel Macron's immigration reform passed in December only passed thanks to the votes of Le Pen's party and actually was amended in order to secure her party's support. So, on issues like immigration, and I think actually also on things like the green agenda, the far right are already kind of setting the tone. And I think it's reasonably likely that we will see some sort of, in France it's called cohabitation. So like, Macron, a supposedly liberal president, but in fact one who's ruled from the sort of center right, and then this far right force in parliament. There's also other kind of smaller players. I mean, I think it's quite likely that we'll see part of the mainstream center right, the Republican Party, will block with Le Pen and certainly choose her over the left in the second round votes. So I think a bit like we've seen in other countries, including notably with Giorgia Meloni in Italy, we see this kind of accommodation between the far right and the mainstream, particularly as we're seeing now with Le Pen's party and its leader in the European Parliament, Jordan Bardella, sort of saying, well, we're not going to leave NATO. They've already sort of buried the question of leaving the euro. Also saying they're not going to reverse some of Macron's most important social reforms. So I think there's a kind of convergence between the right wing and far right space in which they can be a harshly anti-immigrant government, one that probably will pick fights with Macron as president, but which isn't going to fundamentally shift France's place in the kind of main European and Euro-Atlantic institutions.
You mentioned Meloni, and I want to get back to her in a second, but I'm curious what your view is on how France's pension reform last year, where Macron raised the retirement age for people in France, and that's seemingly a right-wing thing, to basically say you're getting your benefits 2 years later. And by the way, Republicans in this country want to raise the Social Security age as well. But it's a cut, right? It's a cut into social services. And there were mass protests in France. How did that play into maybe some of the right wing getting more popular within France?
So I think it's certainly true that the this kind of reform, and also the kind of contemptuous tone in which it's delivered by the government, right? Saying, well, you might think you worked hard for your pension, but actually it's unaffordable. So, this is inevitable. And if you don't like it, well, screw you. And in fact, of course, this pension reform was forced through Parliament without a vote. So this kind of, I think this kind of measure, people think they've worked hard, they have worked hard, and then the benefits they expected to have, they're not getting, then that feeds the opposition, and the far right are in the biggest opposition force. I think it should also be said that, the mobilization against the pension rise, the protests, the strikes, were mainly led by left-wing parties. In fact, Le Pen's party wasn't allowed on the protests. And I think the fact that the movement didn't succeed also helps her.
Right.
Because really what Le Pen's message is kind of like, we're against Macron's reforms, but also the kind of forces of solidarity and resistance. That doesn't work either. That's just the left causing trouble in the streets. So she's kind of against Macron's reform, but also against the movement, against
painting the left as ineffective and right. I mean, that and obviously against the leftist solidarity in that way. And you mentioned Giorgia Meloni earlier. When in history has a far-right leader won in Italy, and then that preceded another far-right leader winning in in Germany? I mean, I don't want to joke about it. It's deeply concerning. But Giorgia Meloni is, I think, her victory, it seems to me from the outside, something that the right throughout Europe has hung their hat on and potentially using as a blueprint for the future.
Definitely. I mean, I think, ultimately a lot of these people in these parties are thinking, well, even in the past, if they've had ties to Russia or said that Putin is good and so on, they have to ask themselves, is that really what they're about politically? And is that necessary to their success? And, the great example of Meloni is basically, if you are willing to say, we're for NATO, we're for weapons supplies to Ukraine, we're for Israel, we're willing to change the European Union from within rather than challenge it, then you're going to, if you say all those things, then you're going to get a pretty easy time from liberals, Christian Democrats, center-right. So it's quite obvious that in Le Pen's party, the same conversation's going on. I mean, just to emphasize, when Meloni was elected, Joe Biden gave a speech to a Democrat fundraiser saying, this is an example of the sort of danger of far-right politics, the danger there is to democracy. And then when Meloni visited Biden in Washington 3 months ago, he kissed her on the forehead in front of a bust of Martin Luther King. So, she has... I
mean, isn't that beautiful, though, David? It's a just display of everybody coming together. No, I don't. No, so, don't think that.
But then you see, this is kind of part of the what I'm saying about the European Union as well. I mean, it's easy to think like, oh, well, this is this model of international cooperation, states coming together, countries that were at war with each other in the 20th century working together. But then if they're working together to, build border infrastructure around Europe's borders that kills thousands of people a year, to keep out Muslims and Africans, or to say, well, Europe as a civilization needs to defend itself from newcomers, then I think there's obviously a problem in terms of how internationalist is that. So, I think broadly we're seeing that, people on the center-right, people in the business establishment and so on, they don't necessarily want these far-right parties to come to power, but they're seeking the ways to deal with them, to integrate them, to arrive at compromises where, yes, someone like Le Pen can be accepted into power so long as she's not really going to change too much, and indeed so long as she's not going to overturn reforms like the pension reform Macron introduced last year. And in fact, ahead of the French election later this month, the Rassemblement National has abandoned plans to undo the pension reform. So I think we're seeing actually the way in which it is taking up quite conventional free market economics, or saying, we'll help out workers, but with tax cuts. In a way, they're quite conventional right-wing recipes.
Let's turn to Germany then, which you also write about in your piece. The far right, I guess the party's known as AfD, short for Alternative for Germany, is my understanding. They won a lot of votes behind the kind of center-right party in this European Union Parliament election. What's going on with the far right in Germany, and what's the threat of a group like AfD taking power, being a significant part of a government there?
Yeah, so I think in a way the AfD is somewhat different from the examples I mentioned. If we look at, say, the far right in France or Spain, certain other countries, they look a bit like they're following Meloni's example, becoming much more unambitious and conventional, pro-establishment in their sort of foreign policy and so on. The AfD in Germany remains something of an outlier. And in fact, it was expelled recently from Le Pen's group in the European Parliament. She's saying, those guys are too radical, nothing to do with me. And the AfD is a party that still pretty openly vaunts its admiration for the Russian leadership, still talks about having a referendum on quitting the euro. And also, probably over the last couple of years, actually the more radical wing of the party that kind of talks more about, they use this phrase Bio-Deutsch, like biologically German, or kind of Nazi references, this kind of stuff they're pretty happy with. So I think in ways they seem like a more radical and extreme force, but I think there's limits to that. I mean, the Christian Democrats, the main center-right party, they still say, well, we wouldn't go into government with the AfD. I think the Christian Democrats are actually doing quite well in polls. They probably don't actually need that alliance at a national level. But then there's these, the AfD, they have 16%. They came second in the European election. And in some of the state elections later this year, it looks pretty likely that they'll be the biggest party. And particularly in the former East Germany, but not only, is where they're strong. So, I think they'll be in a position to form governments and maybe form coalitions, including more conventional center-right parties. So I think the AfD are in many ways, there's been a big mobilization against them in Germany, particularly earlier this year when there were the revelations that they'd held a conference about planning to deport millions of people of migrant background. But those kind of revelations, the scandal, the protests have probably limited their vote somewhat, but they're still on the rise. They still beat the main party of government in the election. So perhaps their rise is a bit slower, but they're definitely still a rising force. And the government party is doing so poorly, I think also shows that while Germany is considered the most stable member of the European Union, it's hardly averse or hardly exempt from the same trends we're seeing in other European countries.
And lastly, David, what is the status of the left in terms of their electoral wins or lack thereof? And why do you view the kind of centrist neoliberal center being so enduring in Europe, and the left struggling to make a ton of gains right now?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, in this election, the left overall remained pretty steady. You can point to some cases where the left did quite well, like Belgium, Finland, even in France, actually, the left did relatively well. So it's not a hopeless picture, but then given how much the centrist establishment is losing and how much the far right is the main beneficiary of that, I think we definitely have a problem. And I think partly it's the result of the defeats of the previous decade, the fact that the revolt against austerity didn't work. We didn't change the European Union. Right. In some countries, the left entered government, Greece disastrously, in some others with quite good effects, like in Spain. But I think that the problem we have now is that the kind of idea of a sort of reform of the European Union, having a project for the EU, is a pretty hard sell. And mainly in this election, what we actually saw isn't left-wing voters turning to the far right instead. What we see is people just not voting. In say Italy as an example, under half of people voted for the first time in history. So we're seeing these low turnouts. We're seeing working class voters mainly kind of withdrawing from politics, and it's very hard to build an alternative. And yet, in some countries, there are good examples. In fact, in the French election, although the far right is very strong and has a very good chance of winning, it should be admitted, the left has formed an alliance which expresses the kind of politics of the pension protests we saw last year, the idea that social solidarity is real and possible, that welfare can be expanded, and indeed also those kind of identity and immigration issues that we don't have to go down the path of ever more exclusion. So I think there are some signals of hope in some countries, but of course, overall, it should be admitted that the situation is very difficult. And I think particularly as the EU probably heading back into austerity in the next couple of years, that's again going to demand a lot of us, because if people think there is no alternative and that the EU can't be changed, then the far right alternative is easy for people to go for. If it says, the problem's immigrants, and what we're going to do to help you is to just cut taxes. That has a certain appeal to large parts of the working class, it should be admitted, and we need to find a way to show that we can actually change things in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and it is just discouraging because you're seeing in the UK the hollowing out of Labour on behalf of corporate interests, and you could have made the party, and I guess there was an effort with Corbyn, into some different vision in response to, and the Democrats were the same way with Biden, in response to Trump, in response to Brexit, there could have been an opportunity to say, we need to develop a leftist alternative, but it's this kind of retreat into centrism that I worry sets up the conditions that we're seeing in Italy and in France that you describe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Labour under Keir Starmer, they've had this big story of we've changed the Labour Party, got rid of the left, and we're being the sensible mainstream, and look how far ahead we are in the polls. What we're actually seeing in this election campaign is that the far right, Nigel Farage's Reform Party, is surging. So, Labour could get a third of the votes and win a huge majority of seats, but they've not changed the basic tendency of national politics, which is indeed for these themes of immigration and identity to become ever more prominent. So, some of your listeners will have guessed from my accent that I am myself British, and I can't say I have a great deal of hope from the Labour Party winning the election. I mean, if you look at the manifestos of the different parties, Labour are actually promising less of an increase in public spending than any of the other parties, including the right-wing ones. So, they're wedded to this doctrine of stable managerial centrism. And I think, it doesn't work electorally, and in a few years' time, that the support they have would have crumbled. But also, it's just not an answer to the kind of social issues we face, in particular in terms of the green agenda and transition in jobs, which has more or less been abandoned by the Labour Party. And also just fundamental issues of poverty and regional inequality and so on that affect Britain very hard. So, I still expect Labour will win the election, and there'll be a lot of triumphalism saying, look how sensible Keir Starmer is. But I think in the long term, if the fundamental problem is working class people ever less identify with the left or its solutions, then I think that what Starmer offers is not going to change that harmful tendency.
Well, appreciate your time today, even though what you have to say is a little concerning. I appreciate it a lot. David Broder, Jacobin's Europe editor, author of Mussolini's Grandchildren, Fascism in Contemporary Italy. And you can read his piece on this in Jacobin, which was called Europe's Center is Holding by Integrating the Far Right. Thanks so much for coming on the show today, David. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, folks, with that, we're going to wrap up the first hour. But first, do we want to look at some of these other flag submissions that we have? We have so many.
Oh, wow, I missed the submissions yesterday.
You did, and then we realized that we'd missed more because we didn't see them.
And I just want to be clear to anybody who...
administrative oversight on the majority report?
No.
So I looked at the first page, but did not realize there was literally 15 more by the time. So I have looked from as recently as 8:50 a.m. at our inbox. So if anyone has sent anything past 8:50 a.m. today, this morning, that was the cutoff. So if you don't see your flag, or if I missed one, I apologize, but that is our distinction here.
Okay, so how are we even doing this, though? Are we including the batch that we showed yesterday.
Yeah, so Dorsey, I've discussed this. We will stitch these two videos together, and then we will have all of them on display.
In a poll.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this
and
is
people obviously can sound off in the comments as well about what they like.
Yes. Not these comments though, right? When we put it in a video together. So you have all of the Vergonia flags that we're crowdsourcing for a potential T-shirt. Okay. Here we go. This is from Bradley.
This is from Jonathan. This and the next one are from Jonathan D.
Jonathan D. of Vergonia. We like that. We like it. look like
a little bit busier. I don't know how that would play, like sort of across
a T-shirt. Yeah.
Battlefield, for instance.
This is from Khalid H.
Khalid H. Good job with the pronunciation there, Bradley. I like the idea, and I like the flag kind of being the flames being a part of the flag, but it may be a little bit too pixelated potentially.
This one of the next.
Should we download them in the full size? We don't want to.
I don't want to besmirch anybody.
Oh no, but it's
in a drive.
And but also, if they were to be shirts, we would also understand that it would translate.
JR in Philly says we need a bracket. Oh well, maybe we could do rank choice on the polls.
I love that. So this one and the next one are from Van L.
Just make it harder for Dorsey.
This is from Van L, and the next one is also from.
I like the idea behind this one. Meow meow, and also just the almost like serial killer-esque font there. Okay. That one.
Now, am I missing? The cat has appeared a couple times. That was originally in the specifications.
Yeah, remember when she said
not the specifications? This is creative license, not the specifications of her flag, but she was saying,
she said meow 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 in that.
Right. Sorry, I forgot the meow.
Yeah. I mean, how could you forget?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
That one's pretty badass.
That's a nice flag. Yeah. It looks like that one looked like a sort of indie rock album.
The next few here are.
I like this one too.
The next few from the next three or so are from David P.
David P. Okay. This is one. Thank you, David P.
With a sword there.
Yes. Oh.
Okay. Yeah, I do like the LGBT. I do like making it LGBT, just because I don't want it like.
You don't want to
think that we're actually doing the shame on people thing.
Right.
We support gay people.
Well, I mean, but this has then if people watch this, it could mean shame on LGBTQ people.
But would you fly a flag with that many colors on to then say, actually, I'm shaming gay people? It's like, well, I didn't notice until I got super close to the flag and then Googled the Italian word on it. But anyway.
I mean, this is pretty standard, right? I do like the flames coming in from the side. Vergonia, shame.
That's true, yeah.
And this is from Mark M.
Who is that?
I actually don't know who that is, but this is from Mark.
Is that Martha Ann?
No, I don't think so. It doesn't, unless it's an earlier photo of her.
I don't know. She's got what is that?
We may have issues with putting someone's real face on a flag, I think. Yeah. All right, keep going. I'm trying not to editorialize. One ring to rule them all.
This is from RF Tiberius.
RF Tiberius. Okay.
Intense flames on that one.
Yes. It's hard for me to read Vergonia there, but we'll keep going.
This is all reminded me of the Pope's Exorcist.
Italian for shame. I just
that's my favorite. Sorry, I don't want to editorialize, but I love having it in phonetics and then
Vergonia. Yeah, there. That was incorporated on some of the ones yesterday too.
Italian.
This is from user 070476.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. This one's really good.
Nick N here.
Who? Nick N? Well done. Of whom should I be afraid?
Is that something she said too?
I think that's something she said, and I just like the medieval. This might be my favorite. This might be my favorite.
This is like Kingdom Come Deliverance.
I guess. I mean, and we can also like put an MR logo on the sleeve or something so people know it's not insane, but
yeah, this does look like something you would get from somebody who like you had a bunch of explosives in the basement.
Right. Oh, wow.
This is from Melissa R.
Melissa R.
Cartoonish.
I mean, like fart cloud font, interesting. But I guess it's smoke. It's smoke. This one's good though. I don't know.
It's from Sydney F.
Sydney F. I like this one too.
It's a good one. Yep.
That would look good on a black shirt.
Sort of.
Yes.
Oh wow.
From Alex. Oh, did it go?
I do like the touch of certifiable beneath there, right? And and like an Illuminati eye in the middle. But again, we don't have the actual ability to make a flag, so it's about what looks best on a t-shirt, I think, is what we should emphasize.
And look, flags have changed much over time. Sometimes they're simpler, sometimes they're more ornate, so it's hard to know which area. Like this one, for instance, pretty
This is
ornate.
from Will B.
We can't use, I think, a picture of Martha Annalito, unfortunately. I guess that's a younger one, but I do. Is that her crying with joy when her theocrat husband got to power?
I have the green and red letters.
This one I like
This
too.
is from DCK Punk.
Yeah, I like this one.
It's kind of like a pizza.
But it does make me hungry. Yeah. And then this one.
I think this one.
Can
is
you
also
zoom
from-
out a little because Matt and I are covering it? There we go. Yeah, this one's good. I mean, the phoenix rising from the ashes. I guess she did call herself that, if I'm not mistaken.
She actually did thematically give people a lot to work with between of whom shall I be afraid.
Meow, meow, meow. All right, perfect. Okay, so those are our secondary, the second batch, and we'll put it all together in a poll, which will be linked in the video where we publish this, and perhaps we'll try to do a rank choice.
Maybe we put them all on a t-shirt.
Oh my gosh.
like a quilt.
Mm-hmm.
It costs like $80 to print a single one.
Big Beef says, laughed out loud at Emma immediately jumping to fart cloud font over smoke font. Yeah, I mean, that's where my mind goes, I guess. Fizzy drinks Vergonia Italian for shame has the same energy as Foster's Australian for beer. Yeah. All right, well, I think that's it, right? We'll head into the fun half in a second. By the way, folks, your support means the world to us when we're talking about things like sexual violence on October 7th or by Israel. It doesn't really do that well
Probably
for
gonna
us.
half our ad revenue for if that.
Yes, for monetization reasons. So we really do rely on you becoming a member. Join themajority.report.com. Support us there. And then you get access to the fun half and all that good stuff. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Oh, yeah, and we got Brandon here as well.
Hey, Brandon.
Hello.
Yeah, Left Reckoning. Actually, support us over at Patreon. Also, well, first support us, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Milton Alamadi, we're going to be talking about South African elections and sort of the restoration of apartheid. In some way, I don't know I don't know. We'll see. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Also, I'm on Blue Sky. I posted a picture of myself. I posted a gratuitous thirst trap. Get people to pilgrimage over to Blue Sky. So follow me, Blue Sky. If you find Matt Leck, I think I'm just Matt Leck on there. So give me a reason to open up that app because I am kind of sick of Twitter a little bit. So check that out. Check out my Blue Sky.
And on ESPN, we spoke about the Celtics winning the championship. I gave a horrible prediction about the Panthers wrapping up on the series in Game 5 that didn't pan out. And then we also talked about the rights obsession with Caitlin Clark and Rory McIlroy choking at the U.S. Open, youtube.com/ESPN show. Brandon, what's happening over on the Discourse?
Yes, over in Discourse, we'll have a new episode out for patrons this weekend where we discuss the latest revelations about Israel's knowledge about the October 7th attack, as well as the upcoming general election in the UK.
Oh, awesome. All right.
Yeah.
Do we have Binder? There he is. Muted, Binder? You're muted. Not yet. How you doing? 1 second. All right.
We'll we'll see him on the other side.
All right, we'll see him on the other side. Check out Doom. Check out Scam Economy. Always good stuff over there. All right.
We have the special Emma fun half.
Oh, we do. We do. Do we have graphics for it now?
I don't think so. Well,
oh, okay.
Unless that came in yesterday, but because I've been out.
No. I don't. Maybe I dreamed that or something. I thought that we did, or I forgot.
You dreamed a music video.
Yeah, no, that's not good for my branding. Okay, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the Majority Report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
I think you need to take over for Sam. Yes, please. No. I'm gonna pause you right there. Wait, what? You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour? Sushi and poker with the boys. Was offered a tour.
Yeah.
Sushi and poker with the boys. What? Tour. Sushi and poker.
Tim's upset.
Tour. Sushi and poker with the boys. Was offered a tour. Sushi and
That's what we call it in the biz.
tour. Sushi and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour. Sushi and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Well, look at how sad he's become now. You shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour. Sushi and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Tour.
Wow.
Sushi. I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind. So was offered a tour. Sushi and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour. Sushi and poker with the boys. Boy. Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid.
I had this debate 7,000 times.
A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Tour. I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like, I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, all right.
It's not a fun job. Tour.
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
Boss. Willy Wonka. Tour.
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
What's that offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing.
Boss. That offered a tour?
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Rogan has done it again.
That offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's
poker with the boys.
I think he might be blowing it out of proportion.
real thing.
That's poker with the boys. That offered a tour?
That's a real thing. That's
poker.
Let's go, Joey.
Tour. Sushi and poker with the boys.
Take it easy, Glenn.
Tour. Sushi and poker.
Things have really gotten out of hand.
Sushi and poker with the boys.
Delusional.
Tour.
Deluded.
Sushi.
You don't have a clue as to what's going on. Live YouTube.
Sam has like the weight of the world on his shoulders. Sam doesn't want to do this show anymore. It was so much easier when the Majority Report was just you. You were happy.
Let's change the subject.
Right.
Rangers and Knicks doing great.
Now, shut up. You don't want people saying reckless things on your program.
That's
No.
one of the most difficult parts about this show.
This is a pro-killing podcast.
I'm thinking maybe it's time we bury the hatchet.
Left is best. Violet.
Tour.
Don't be foolish and don't fucking tweet at me and don't bitch. The way Emma has cucked all of these people, love it.
That's where my heart is, so I wrote my honors thesis about it.
Oh,
Sorry,
she
finance.
wrote an honest thesis. I guess I should hand the main mic to you now.
You are to the right of me on foreign policy.
We already fund Israel, dude. Are you against that?
That's a tougher question I have an answer to.
Incredible theme song.
Hi, Bumbler.
Emma Vigeland, absolutely one of my favorite people. Actually, not just in the game, like period.
We are back, folks. It is the fun half, and we now do have Matt Binder, the host of Doomed and Scam Economy. What's happening over on Doomed and Scam Economy? Hello.
Sure. I had a call-in show on the live stream last night. Callers from France and Chile to tell me about what's going on in their respective countries with various, for example, in France, the elections. And this weekend, I will be up in NY16 canvassing for Jamal Bowman, and you're all welcome to come out, listeners. So be sure to the information's in the description on my latest YouTube video. Yeah, that's that.
All right.
Hitting the streets.
Yep. A Square says, Emma, good realpolitik frightening update of the recent EU elections and political landscape. I missed that Maloney was at the White House. The kiss on the forehead, and good on your guest to point out that it was front of the MLK bust. It's another illustration of how politically inept this administration is. Yeah, I mean, in the end, do I think that Biden will face one political consequence from voters for kissing Maloney on the head? No, I don't. But do I think it's extremely wrong and messed up and that she's a far-right